Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV. Well, I'm back from the Lapis conference, and indeed you may have seen the video. I'm not sure. I'm shooting this video and the other. I made a reportage, and I don't know which one I'm going to actually upload first. So you may have already seen the reportage before this one, or you may not have seen it yet. If you haven't, then rest assured it is coming soon. It is coming soon. What I wanted to talk to you about, indeed I touch on this in my Lapis reportage, was a book I was reading. I got this book from this book actually is one. Let me just check I framed it. Hang on. No, this book is one that was actually bought for me by someone, a viewer actually. They offered to buy this for me, and I said thank you very much. It's a book I read many years ago when it first came out, but I've decided to reread it, and I'm glad I did. I'm very glad that I did. This book is called Raechel's Eyes, and that's how Raechel has an unusual spelling there, and it is by Helen Luttrell and Jean Bilodeau, if I pronounced that correctly. If you see there what it says there, the strange but true case of a human-alien hybrid, and you can pause and read the back if you want. There you go. But I think this is a new edition now that's come out, and it's got a new foreword and everything. But I'll just have a look at the dedication. You see that there? To Marissa, Raechel, and anyone who, because they are different, has ever felt alone. Now, who does that remind you of, eh? It reminds you of yourself, most of the people watching this video, and it certainly reminds me of myself. It really does. So that's a good start, isn't it? Now, I read this book. I mean, you can. There'll be a link in the description box so you can actually purchase your own copy. And I took this with me. I just picked it up and took it with me for my trip to Lapis, because I go by coach, as you know, and indeed you'll see it on the film. And the coach takes about 7 or 8 hours to get there. I much prefer the coach to the train, because firstly it's about half the price, and increasing as the fares goes up. The half is assumed to become a third or a quarter, and also it's far less stressful. You get to sit down, whereas most trains these days are overcrowded. You have to stand. My dad went to Birmingham. We had to stand all the way from Oxford to Birmingham. Oh, I couldn't handle that. And you always get a seat. Everyone has a seat, and they don't allow drinking on coaches. You're banned from drinking, which means no alcohol. Means, I mean, if that's the difference on a train, of course they can't wait to shove these overpriced cans of lager in your face on the trolley, and they encourage you to drink as much as possible. So what you get on the train, you get the lager louts on the train. Usually, sometimes guys coming back from a football match. Sometimes they're just getting pissed up anyway. So that's why I like the coach, and I don't care if it takes longer. That's one. The downside of the coach is it's slower. But I don't care. I mean, it gives me a chance to read books. Now, I read this book very quickly. In fact, I read it on the journey. I read it a couple of times at night time when I was at the conference. The 3 nights I was there when I was dropping off to sleep. But really, I'm surprised how quickly I got through this book. It was very, very. I felt very, very hooked on it. Very, very intensively hooked on it. Now, the book affected me. It was almost like reading a different book as compared to when I read it first, which was when it first came out in the mid 2000s. It was completely different, and this has raised some questions in my mind. It's extremely poignant, even though it's not really written in that kind of style. The style itself is not particularly emotional, but I found it so. It's not like, say, Steven Spielberg's film E.T., which is specifically designed for using several filmmaking techniques to tug at your heartstrings. Same with Steven Spielberg presents the Taken miniseries. I don't know if you've seen that miniseries, Taken. Not to be confused with the movie or the more recent series. It's actually one that came out in the 90s. It's absolutely brilliant. But it's, again, very affecting. It hooks you in emotionally. And indeed this book did that, even though, as I said, it wasn't really designed that way, but it portrays aliens in a particular way. Now, aliens, of course, are alien, which means they're not from Earth. In fact, I've got no doubt they come from more than one other place. There's a whole array, a taxonomy of different beings, Greys, Nordics, etc. and they exhibit a wide variety of behaviour. But the alien in this story is rather like the one in the hybrid in the Taken miniseries, an extremely sensitive and empathic individual, excessively so, much more so than almost any person I'm familiar with. And it's maybe the reason it's affected me so much is it may have hooked me into some kind of some hidden memories or something in myself. I don't know. I'm just saying I've got this implant in my arm. I don't know how it got there. I'm just like, and I didn't expect to be affected like this. I wasn't the first time I read it, but I've changed a lot since I first read the book. I first read the book almost 15 odd years ago, and I changed considerably in that time. It's a book that's split into two parts. The first half is essentially a a fictionalization. It's I mean, honestly, if you didn't know it was a true story, you could just say someone made it up. It's a fictionalization. No doubt the skeptics will dismiss the whole story as that. They say it's nothing but it's just nothing but a fictionalization. One moment, please, ladies and gentlemen. I've got to do something. I just realised I forgot to put my phone on silent. I don't want anyone. Do not disturb. That's it. I don't want any bugger interrupting me while I'm speaking. All right, and okay. So it's split into two. The first part, like I say, is like a story. It's a true story, but it reads like a novel. And really, I mean, I could have read that and think someone just made it up. I'd had a feeling that someone just made it up. But the second half contains a lot more. It contains various interviews with the witnesses. The second half of the book is essentially a scientific study of this case, a ufological study of the case. Now, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. It may not be completely possible to do so, but this story is quite famous. You may well have seen interviews with the author if you're into UFOs and things like this. But it's about a woman called Helen, who's actually Helen Luttrell, the author, and she has a daughter called Marissa. Now, apart from a lot of the names have been changed in this story to protect identities, and indeed Marissa, the woman known as Marissa, is now passed away. She died. Now, she was quite young because she was severely diabetic, and this is really how she got into this situation, because she went to university, and this is the story. Well, the story's told chronologically because you hear the other half of the story as well. But I'll tell you the Marissa side of the story without giving away too many spoilers. Marissa, in 1972, goes to university, and she goes and lives in student accommodation in a flat where she shares with other students. And she's in a two-bedroom flat, so they suggest she has a roommate, and she says great. And this girl arrives. This girl called Raechel Nadian, and her father is an Air Force colonel, and he arrives with this girl, and he's very concerned for her, and he lets her live. He's quite happy. He meets Marissa, and he quite likes her. But he's very caring about his daughter, who's like in her late teens, as university students do when they start. And very quickly, he warms to Marissa, and the girl warms to Marissa too. The girl's called Raechel, as I said, with this unusual spelling, Raechel. But there's something odd about her. She's very thin and waif-like, quite small, petite in appearance, and her skin is an unusual colour. It's a kind of grey-green. She has unusual facial features. In fact, I'll just show you the sketch of her. Where was it? Because the author actually did a sketch of what Raechel looked like. Is this it? No, that's right. There's a lot in here, actually. I mean, that's kind of a sketch of what she looks like. You can see that. I'll just check it's framed. Hang on. That's a sketch of what she looks like. She has now the thing is, the eyes you don't see straight away, but because she wears these wraparound heavy sunglasses, and she always wears them, come rain or shine, and it's explained away that she has some eye problem. Excuse me. She also wears a big broad brimmed sun hat. She can't bear to be in the sun, and she seems to be strangely unaware of a lot of things in the world. She's never heard of the Beatles and lots of other things like that. She's never heard of She's never heard of Simon and Garfunkel, who is Marissa's favourite music act, and she's not heard of sport. She doesn't seem to know much about the world. Yet she and Raechel form an interesting bond, and it's now the funny thing is she doesn't eat normal food either. She has boxes dropped off with this symbol on it. The only marking is a symbol here, this triangle with 3 lines running through it, 3 horizontal lines running through the base. That's the only markings on this box. And inside the box is this kind of green mush, and it's and some bottles of water, special kinds of water. And Marissa says, "Can I try some?" And Raechel says, "No, it would make you sick." I just point out Marissa, because is severely diabetic, like I said, and this has caused her to become blind. Well, she has limited sight, which comes and goes as time goes on, but she manages to work this out about these boxes by staring very hard with her eyes very close to the box. But basically, everything's a blur to her. Now, when Marissa's mother Helen, the author, calls around, Raechel trips over, and her mother puts her hand out on her arm to stop her falling, and her skin is cold and clammy and like a mushroom. She sits like a mushroom skin, and her dark glasses slip off, and Helen gets a look at her eyes, and her eyes are, as you just saw, they're like green, cat-like, with a slit pupil, not human. Very large, upward pointing towards the edges, very like the Grey's eyes. You see, the second half of the book contains, basically, it's a transcript of hypnotic regressions and other interviews with Dr. June Steiner, who's the hypnotherapist looking after her. Now, I've read a lot of these transcripts because I've been studying people like Bud Hopkins and John Mack, but this is an unusual kind of hypnotherapy, and it works on 2 levels. She has like finger singling and things like that, which I'm not always familiar with, but she speaks to the deeper mind, and that tells the story. And when I read that, that sounds really real. I mean, I've read a lot of these transcripts, and I think that sounds like a real hypnotic regression transcript. It really does. The other part of the story is the Air Force colonel, who's called Harry Nadian, and it goes back to 1955. He joins the US Air Force, and very quickly he's seconded to a special unit dealing with UFO encounters. Now, this is something I've heard from many sources, that there are specific military outfits that specialize in dealing with UFOs, and indeed there's many sources that say this, and you can see this in some of the crash retrieval incidents, including even the old ones, like the definitive one, Roswell. When Roswell happened in 1947, you get a distinct impression that the troops dealing with it knew what they were doing, as if they had experience and training in this unusual duty, which means there were Roswells before Roswells. And so they're part of a regional unit. They cover a large part of the United States, say the western half of the United States. There's another unit that deals with the eastern half. And their job is to be on standby on this base. And it's an underground base, which they call Four Corners, which is not in the Four Corners area. It's near this place called Ely, E-L-Y, which I was going to look up on a map and haven't yet, which I was meant to do. But he's selected because, firstly, he doesn't have Ely, Nevada, right? Yeah, he doesn't have a very good relationship with his parents. They were against him joining the U.S. Air Force and things like that. It's actually very close to Ely. Is very close to Area 51. I just looked it up, and it is. It's quite close to Area 51. And also he is psychically sensitive. He has psychic abilities. That's another reason why. This is another reason why they've selected him specifically. And he goes to this base, which is you just go through this fence, and there's nothing marked, and there's these old buildings which is just a cover because the real thing is underground. And he goes under there, and he's trained up in this very unusual this very unusual outfit that he's a part of, because this strange detachment from his normal duties. Because funny thing is, they have a very different culture there to the rest of the U.S. Air Force. Like he has to call it. He calls his CO Bill, not Sir or Colonel, because the CO is a colonel. He says Sir, and of course that goes against all the training you have in the military, where you have to respect rank. You have to address people by their military titles or Sir, and he. What happens is a UFO crashes and they have to go out and deal with it, or lands, and they actually have aliens in the base because there's like an exchange program. They call it the humanization project, and that means they're basically, as I've often talked about on this channel, that the Earth has essentially been colonized by extraterrestrials. It's just that the people who know about it in the highest levels of the state have kept it from us. These aliens are actually living on the Earth. Now, so he goes out to attend various incidents. Now, some of the flying saucers just crash. They crash on the Earth, and everyone gets killed. There's a lot of radiation around and heat and things like that. And one day he's doing this, and he rescues these aliens. Well, he tries to rescue the aliens, and he thinks they're all dead because the UFO bursts into flames, which often happens when it hits the ground. But he suddenly hears this voice crying out, and he sees there's this young female alien in the craft. So he risks his life to go into the craft to pull her out. I mean, he has like a radiation and a heat protection suit, like the things firemen wear. But he goes in and he brings her out. He brings her out of the craft, and she's badly hurt. But he takes her to the base hospital, and these other nurses are there. And she's this young girl, and they don't know what to call her, but she communicates telepathically. This is one of the reasons why those men are particularly found. Now, funnily enough, John Ronson, who wrote The Men Who Stare at Goats, the book which the comedy film is based on, and there's a documentary called Crazy Rules of the World, which is worth watching. He talked about this. He talked about it was General Albert Stubblebine who talked about this in the remote viewing program, that military recruits were tested for this sort of thing by whatever means. I don't know how they do it exactly, but I know that the Stanford Research Unit was working on it and things like that. And so Harry, this officer, is in the program because of his ability to communicate telepathically, and he communicates with the other aliens telepathically as well. So they bring this young girl to the hospital. And he feels an incredible sense of a desire to care for her, because he's never had children. He was engaged to be married, and his fiancée was killed in a car crash. And the two nurses also bond with this young girl, who's like a young teenager at the time she's rescued, and he feels emotionally involved with this craft, with this creature. And the creature itself, Raechel, this female alien, is actually a human hybrid. And this becomes significant later on. I won't go into details because I don't want to spoil the whole thing for you, but it turns out that it's not a coincidence that these two families come together, Marissa's family and Harry and his family, and Raechel, because there is like a blood link there, and I won't go into details, but it comes out in the second half of the book, which is often it's the case. You have like large numbers of people connected in ways they don't really understand. But he just felt he really loved this girl, and he really felt that he really loved this girl as if she was his daughter, and the other nurses do. And it turns out she didn't have a family, and we don't hear much about the other aliens on the craft, and Raechel doesn't talk about them much, but she's this very sweet alien, as some aliens are, which is why she's like really, really kind, and doesn't want to hurt anyone or anything like that, and they just want to give her a family. And it's making me feel emotional right now. They want to have a family, and they don't want her to be alone. because she's been alone in the craft, and she's been alone on this wherever she comes from. And she's never really revealed. She doesn't really have a family, and she's a product of this medical experimentation. Indeed, during the second half of the book, during the hypnosis sessions, the mother, Helen, the author of the book, is introduced to by Raechel to where the alien hybrids come from, and it's just something that comes up again and again and again. They are essentially conceived in essentially synthetic wombs, are artificial growth chambers, which are rather like fish tanks. And this comes up. Craig Mutua talked about this. Other people have talked about this. They're shown what looks like large tanks of water, like an aquarium, and they look inside for the fish, and they see creatures swimming around, which are like unborn babies. That comes up again and again. I've heard that from so many people. I really have. And Helen is very upset by this. Raechel tries to explain what's going on with this, what's actually happening. Another thing that what happens very often is that the alien abductees, female, sometimes male alien abductees, are taken aboard a craft, and they have to. This is so common in abduction stories. The aliens seem to want the men's sperm, the reproductive cells, and they do this in sometimes medically, as you hear in some, and sometimes the man is enticed to have sex with an alien, with a female, with an alien that looks like a bit female, and somehow they mess with his mind to make him really, really want to do that. I mean, Antonio Villas-Boas is a perfect example, the Brazilian farmer. Women also are often taken and then impregnated. They very often are. Creatures are actually placed in the womb. Now, I've known several people who've reported this, and indeed it's quite common. Is the woman will find she's pregnant, and she may not have any memory of the actual abduction. She'll assume that she and her husband are just having a baby, and it's really, really great. And they'll go to the doctors and everything like that, and it'll be they'll say, great, you're having a baby. Then suddenly she'll wake up one day and she's no longer pregnant, and she will go to the doctors and say, look, what's happening? You said I was pregnant. And, well, what can the doctor say? Honestly, what? Obviously, if there's a miscarriage, then there'll be symptoms. Miscarriages are very obvious, but he'll just say, I'm sorry, we must have misdiagnosed you. We thought you were pregnant when you weren't. There's nothing else really a doctor there's a doctor in the modern world can say, is there? And then what happens is when the woman recalls her abduction or is regressed hypnotically, she'll recall being taken by aliens and the baby's taken from her. And I've known people, women, who've been through this experience, and it's incredibly traumatic. And they have a child basically who's growing up in the alien world. And sometimes they meet the child. I mean, sometimes they're encouraged actually to have contact with the child. I mean, even all relationships with the other aliens that provided the sex cells, the gametes. I mean, Simon Parkes talks about this a lot. But they can never take the alien to Earth. They can never take their child to Earth. The child very often looks distinctly half human and half something else. And so this appears to be happening, although Helen doesn't actually recall this until much later on when she has hypnotic regression, which didn't take place until the didn't take place until the late 90s. The incident with Raechel happened in 1972. That's when Raechel was rescued in the mid-60s, and she lived on the base for a while with her new family, Harry and the nurses. And then Harry wanted to, because Harry adopted her legally. He wanted to become her legal father, and this was all arranged through the unit, the Air Force, called ATIC. I don't know if that's a real unit or whether that's what they call it. But yeah, I mean, they adopted her, and he decided to let her experience the real world, and so he took her to university where she could learn, and she lived with Marissa. And and eventually she goes. I mean, she has to go, and it's so sad. It's like, and I don't know why, because it's not really done like E.T. When E.T. goes home in the film E.T., which is specifically intended to be poignant, it's especially intended to be a tearjerker. This is not, but the book is written quite a matter-of-fact style, the narrative, the fictionalization narrative. But it's just so, it's incredibly heartrending when she goes, because everything gets left behind and all her records are removed, Raechel, but she leaves a note for her friend Marissa just to say, I've got to go, sorry, I've got to go. And then Marissa never sees her again. And I mean, I don't know what it'd be like to be separated from someone. Like if you yourself don't fit in with other people. I mean, in Marissa's case, she was blind. Although her sight actually improves at the end. But she still has this diabetes, which causes this terrible problem. Now, she eventually leaves college. She leaves the college and she marries and has a child. Then sadly she dies of her diabetes. But she never sees Raechel again. I don't know if I should spoil it for you, but it's really sad because Raechel is killed. She's murdered. And this is what I couldn't believe. I mean, Harry seems to. That's what I don't get. Harry seems to sanction that. He considers it necessary as part of the humanization program, which I can't believe. I can't believe when you read how he loved her as his own daughter. I mean, I suspect he must have been mind controlled, or that must be some kind of mistake. You only find out that in the hypnotic regressions. Like I said, there may be a few spoilers in this, but it's really, I really do recommend it. I do. It'll make, it's thought provoking. I think it's real. I do think it's real. It's, especially when you get onto the second half, for someone who's like looked into these sort of cases quite a lot, it rings true. It happened a long time ago. In fact, like I say, 1972 it all happened, and then Helen she started having regressions in the late 90s, and then she wrote the book. The book came out in the first edition of the book came out in what was it, 2005, which is when I read it, and I don't know what to think about how if there are these creatures around and they're like, I mean, they're sort of half human, and they look part like Raechel has these. You saw the picture. She has this small nose with no bridge, thin lips, pointed face. She's like an alien, and thin build. She's like half human, half alien. She has thin, wispy hair. She always wears this sun hat and all this scarf. You can see she's got a scarf around her head, and the sunglasses. But I think they're out there. I think they're out there, and maybe they just. I mean, maybe I know some of them. I don't know. Maybe I met some of them and can't remember, because I just started. I mean, I don't mind. I can't. I'm not like a. I'm quite a tough bloke, as you know. I'm quite a sort of tough bloke, but I felt really, really moved by this story, as if like it was almost like it felt like I was recalling some kind of memory. It almost felt like it was it was almost like recalling some kind of memory, and I don't know. It's like it all happened before I was born, but so it can't be literally Raechel and what happened. But I mean, it's like I feel like there's maybe more questions about my own life I have to ask as a result of my very strange emotional reaction to reading this book, and that's something I don't know anything about, and I'll have to cover maybe later on. It may be related to the implant that I've got in my arm, which regular readers will know is there, and I have no memory of any experience about how it got there, none at all. And some people have urged me to get hypnotic regression myself. I'm not going to do that just now. I just feel it frightens me, quite frankly. I mean, I've discussed this a bit in another book, in another video, but it's something I don't know if I can cope with right now. Maybe I'll do it sometime in the future. But anyway, there'll be a link in the description box to where you can get hold of this book. It's actually not, the print's quite big, it's not as long as it looked. I read the whole thing for when I got on the coach on the Friday evening at Lapis, and I finished. Well, I didn't quite finish. I was on the last few pages when I got home, and I finished the last few pages when I was in my room at home on Monday. But I was completely and utterly soaked into this book, absorbed into it, and I never. It's a long time since a book has affected me this way. There's other books that have affected me very deeply, but this is just like, this has affected me deeply, and I don't know why. That's the point of this review. But do check up, do get yourself a copy. Link in the show notes or in the description box. So do get yourself a copy of it and have a read. And if you've read it, or you do read it, let me know what you think. Anyway, hope you if you're watching, if I've uploaded the Lapis reportage first, I hope you enjoyed my Lapis reportage. Which, if you haven't, then keep an eye on the channel because it'll be coming up very soon. Thank you for watching Her Panwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order.